He freed a wolf from a hunter's trap, but when the pack surrounded him, no one could believe what happened next. The icy Montana air crackled with a tension so thick Daniel McGregor could almost taste it, metallic and cold, like the tang of fear in his own mouth. He stood frozen, his breath a ragged plume in the subalpine chill. 5 gray shapes, low and silent, had materialized from the dense lodgepole pines and Engelmann spruce, forming a lethal crescent before him. Timber wolves. Big ones. Their bodies were coiled springs of muscle beneath thick winter coats, ears flattened, golden eyes burning with an intensity that stripped away every layer of his seasoned wilderness experience, leaving him bare and vulnerable. The low, guttural growls vibrated in his chest cavity, a primal sound that resonated deep in his bones. The acrid, musky scent of predator mixed with damp earth and pine resin filled his nostrils. His only defense was the sturdy hickory walking stick clutched in his white-knuckled hand, a pathetically inadequate twig against the apex predators of this unforgiving landscape. Before we reveal the unbelievable ending, watch the whole video to find out the whole truth. And if you love animals and this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video from us. Now, back to Daniel, trapped in the wolves' deadly circle. Just moments before, a different kind of tension had gripped him, the high-wire act of freeing the pack's alpha male. The magnificent creature, larger than the others, its fur a tapestry of gray, black, and silver, now stood slightly apart, its front legs stained dark with blood, favoring it heavily. Daniel had found it hours earlier, its limb caught fast in the cruel bite of a poacher's cable snare. After a nerve-shredding process, he'd managed to cut the wire. The wolf had regarded him then with an unnerving, intelligent gaze. Not gratitude, Daniel knew, but a cold, wild assessment, before limping a few steps back into the deeper shadows. Daniel had thought, foolishly, that the worst was over. He'd been wrong. The pack's arrival was swift, silent, almost spectral. They hadn't howled. They simply were, a unified force drawn by their leader's distress or the scent of his blood. Their focus shifted instantly from the injured alpha to the interloper, Daniel. He knew the ferocious territoriality of wolves, their unwavering defense of the pack, especially an injured leader. He was the unknown, the potential threat. In their world, that was often a death sentence. He remained utterly still, trying to project non-aggression, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He locked eyes briefly with the largest female, likely the alpha female, noting a faint scar above her left eye. Her stare was flat, devoid of mercy. Then, something shifted. The injured alpha male, the wolf Daniel had freed, lifted his great head. He didn't snarl at Daniel. Instead, he emitted a low, short whine, followed by a soft, authoritative huff directed at the surrounding pack. It wasn't a command a human would recognize, but its effect was instantaneous. The growling subsided slightly, replaced by an audible uncertainty in the air. The wolves glanced from their leader to Daniel, confusion flickering in their wild eyes. The alpha male then subtly dipped his head, gesturing almost imperceptibly towards Daniel, and then towards a narrow game trail leading away from the dense thicket and down the slope. The tension didn't vanish, but it changed. The wolves began to move, not an attack, not to retreat, but something else entirely. something Daniel couldn't yet comprehend. Daniel McGregor, at 52, was no stranger to the raw edges of the American wilderness. His face, weathered by decades of sun, wind, and cold, held the quiet intensity of a man who spent more time listening to the language of the wild than the chatter of cities. His thick salt and pepper hair was usually tucked under a worn felt hat. For over 30 years, his Nikon had been his constant companion, his third eye, capturing the fleeting moments of beauty and brutality that unfolded far from paved roads and hiking trails. He wasn't interested in the curated wilderness of national parks crowded with tourists. He sought the deep back country, the places where silence was the loudest sound, where encounters were unfiltered, unpredictable, and utterly real. This particular corner of Montana's vast mountainous backcountry was exactly that kind of place. Jagged peaks clawed at the sky, their lower slopes thick with ancient forests of pine, fir, and larch, giving way to alpine meadows usually painted with wildflowers, though now dusted with an early autumn frost. He'd established a small, discreet base camp near a rushing creek a week prior. His old but reliable Jeep parked a good 3 miles away down a barely there track accessible only by high-clearance vehicles. His primary goal for this trip had been to photograph the elusive Canada lynx, a creature he'd only glimpsed a handful of times before. He cherished the solitude, the rhythm of rising before dawn, tracking potential subjects, waiting patiently for hours, sometimes days, for the perfect light, the perfect moment. He carried the tools of his trade, cameras, long lenses, tripod, but also the tools of survival, map, compass, GPS, first aid kit, bear spray, knife, and the ever-present hickory walking stick, more for balance on treacherous terrain than defense, though he was grateful for its solid feel now. He moved through the landscape with practiced quietness, acutely aware of the signs: a bent twig, a faint track in the mud, the distant call of a bird that told the stories of the forest. The inciting incident hadn't been dramatic at first. It began as a sound that didn't belong, a low, intermittent whimpering, punctuated by muffled, desperate growls carried on the wind. It wasn't the sound of a predator hunting, nor the call of an elk or deer. It was the sound of suffering, persistent and raw. Daniel's curiosity, honed by years of observation, warred with his innate caution. Approaching an unknown, distressed animal, especially a large one, was risky, but the sound tugged at something deeper, a respect for the wild creatures he documented, an aversion to needless suffering even in the harsh cycle of nature. Poaching was a reality even here. Snares and illegal traps, a hidden blight on the landscape. He followed the sound cautiously, moving slowly, using trees and boulders for cover, his senses on high alert. The whimpering grew louder, more desperate. Then he saw it. Partially hidden behind a screen of dense undergrowth lay a massive timber wolf, its front paw caught fast in a crude cable snare anchored to the base of a sturdy sapling. The wire had bitten deep into the flesh, and the ground around was torn up from the animal's frantic struggles. Blood matted the fur around the wound. The wolf was clearly exhausted, its breathing shallow, but its eyes, when they fixed on Daniel as he emerged cautiously into view, blazed with untamed fire, a mixture of pain, fear, and defiance. It let out a low, warning growl, baring its teeth, straining against the cable despite the agony it must have caused. Daniel froze, his heart sinking. This was the alpha male, he was almost certain, The size, the presence, the immediate protective reaction even when trapped, and he was caught in a poacher's illegal death trap. The choice was stark: walk away and leave it to a slow, agonizing death, or attempt something incredibly dangerous. Daniel stood motionless for a long minute, his mind racing. Approaching a trapped, injured alpha wolf was courting disaster. Even weakened, the animal possessed formidable strength and speed. A single bite could sever tendons, crush bone, cause life-threatening bleeding miles from help. His every instinct screamed caution. Yet, the sight of the magnificent creature reduced to such a state by a coward's snare ignited a slow burn of anger and empathy within him. He hadn't come here to interfere. His code was usually one of observation, but this felt different. This wasn't nature's cycle. It was human cruelty infringing upon it. He slowly backed away, putting more distance between himself and the wolf, trying to appear non-threatening. The wolf watched his every move, its growls rumbling low in its chest, head lowered, ready to snap if he came closer. Daniel spoke softly, uselessly perhaps, but the low, calm tone was as much for his own benefit as the wolf's. "Easy now, fella. I'm not going to hurt you. Just want to see if I can help." He retreated to a safer distance behind a thick tree trunk and unpacked his small field kit. He didn't have specialized animal rescue equipment, but he did have a sturdy multi-tool with wire cutters, and he always carried about 30 feet of strong nylon rope. His best bet, he reasoned, was to use his walking stick and the rope to create a rudimentary extension, allowing him to cut the wire from a safer distance. Fashioning a secure loop, he managed to attach the multi-tool, open to the wire cutter jaws, to the end of his hickory stick using several tight wraps of rope. It was clumsy, but it might just work. The next hour was a master class in patience and nerve-wracking tension. Daniel approached the trapped wolf again, slowly, deliberately, holding the makeshift tool out in front of him. The wolf reacted instantly, lunging to the end of the snare's tether, snarling fiercely, its eyes promising retribution. Daniel stopped, waited for the animal to subside slightly, its energy drained by pain and the futile effort. He advanced again, inch by agonizing inch. The smell of blood and stressed animal was strong now. He could see the raw, torn flesh where the wire dug in, the desperate, intelligent eyes tracking his every move. He needed to get the cutter jaws around the taut steel cable. The angle was awkward. The wolf, despite its exhaustion, remained wary, tensing every time the end of the stick came near its trapped leg. Several times it snapped warningly, forcing Daniel to retreat and wait. Sweat trickled down his temples, cold despite the crisp air. His own muscles ached from the tension. He focused on his breathing, on keeping his movements slow and predictable. Finally, a moment of opportunity. The wolf slumped slightly, its head down, perhaps a momentary lapse into the shock of its ordeal. Daniel seized the chance, extending the stick quickly but smoothly, maneuvering the cutter jaws over the thin, brutally strong cable just above the loop, tightening around the wolf's leg. He squeezed the handle of the multi-tool, channeled through the rope connection. It wasn't easy leverage. He had to apply pressure carefully, steadily, praying the rope wouldn't slip or the tool wouldn't break. The wolf flinched violently as the pressure was applied near its wound, but didn't have the strength for another major lunge. There was a sharp snap as the wire parted. The release was instantaneous. The wolf yelped, scrambling backward, pulling its freed leg clear. It landed awkwardly, favoring the injured limb heavily, blood dripping onto the dry pine needles. It shook its massive head, looking from its now free leg to Daniel with what seemed like utter confusion, mixed with ingrained suspicion. Daniel immediately started backing away, giving the animal space, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and residual fear. "Okay," he murmured. "Okay, you're free. Just go. Get out of here." The wolf took a few hesitant, limping steps back towards the dense cover of the trees, then stopped, turning its head to look back at Daniel one last time. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was the unfathomable gaze of the wild, assessing, calculating. Daniel held his breath, wondering if it would charge or flee. It was in that moment of suspended animation that the forest seemed to exhale the rest of the pack. One moment, Daniel was focused on the alpha. The next, 5 other wolves were simply there. They emerged from the trees like gray ghosts, silent and purposeful, their attention immediately locking onto Daniel. They fanned out, instinctive pack behavior taking over, forming the deadly semicircle he found himself trapped in at the start of our story. The low growls began. The body language shifted from cautious approach to clear threat display. They were protecting their injured leader, and Daniel, the strange, smelling, 2-legged creature standing near him, was the obvious target of their suspicion and protective aggression. The brief sense of accomplishment Daniel had felt evaporated, replaced by the cold, primal certainty that he had traded one dangerous situation for another, potentially far worse. The air thickened with menace. Daniel stood rooted to the spot, the world narrowing to the ring of predators before him. The memory of freeing the alpha felt distant, irrelevant now. Survival instincts screamed at him, "Don't run, don't make sudden movements, don't show fear, don't break eye contact with the lead female whose scarred muzzle seemed inches away." But his body betrayed him. A fine tremor ran through his hands. His mouth was desert dry. He was acutely aware of his isolation, miles from any help, facing down a coordinated pack of apex predators defending their injured leader. This was it, he thought, a sudden, absurdly calm certainty washing over him. This is how it ends. But then came the interruption, the moment that fractured the terrifyingly predictable script of predator and perceived prey. The injured alpha male, who had remained slightly apart, observing the standoff with that unnerving wild intelligence, took a step forward despite the obvious pain it caused him. He wasn't positioning himself to join an attack on Daniel. Instead, he lifted his head again and made that sound, the low, guttural huff, firmer this time, more insistent. It wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable authority that cut through the menacing growls of the others. He then did something remarkable, something Daniel would replay in his mind countless times later, trying to decipher its exact meaning within the complex lexicon of wolf communication. The alpha dipped his head slightly, a subtle but clear gesture, first towards Daniel, then swinging his gaze and muzzle unmistakably towards the narrow game trail that snaked away through the undergrowth, down the slope. The path Daniel himself had noted earlier as a potential route away from this dense thicket. It wasn't a human nod, not an invitation, but a direction. The pack's reaction was immediate and palpable. The growling didn't cease entirely, but it dropped in pitch, morphing into uncertain whines and low rumbles. The rigid, aggressive postures softened almost imperceptibly. They glanced nervously between the Alpha and Daniel, confusion warring with ingrained pack hierarchy. The alpha male held their gaze, unwavering, his presence, even injured, radiating dominance. He gave another soft huff, reinforcing the signal. Daniel's mind, racing a moment before with grim finality, now struggled to process this bizarre turn. He understood instinctively this wasn't an act of gratitude as a human might interpret it. Wolves don't operate on sentimentality. This was likely a complex interplay of pack dynamics. Perhaps the alpha, recognizing Daniel wasn't the source of his initial injury, the snare, and wasn't actively behaving aggressively now, was signaling to the pack that Daniel was not an immediate threat to be eliminated, but rather an unknown element to be moved away from their core territory, especially with the alpha himself vulnerable. The gesture towards the trail wasn't an offer of safe passage. It was likely an indication of the desired direction for the perceived threat. Leave. Whatever the precise lupine logic, Daniel recognized a sliver of possibility, a crack in the wall of imminent violence. Standing still was suicide. Running was suicide. But moving slowly, deliberately, along the path the alpha had indicated, that felt like the only option that wasn't certain death. It was a terrifying gamble. He was moving from being a static, frozen target to a potentially provocative moving one, but he had to trust the alpha's signal and the pack's hesitant deference. This was the turning point. He was no longer just reacting. He had to act, to participate in this strange, dangerous choreography. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Daniel took a single, small step sideways towards the indicated trail. The wolves tensed instantly, a ripple of low growls rising again. The alpha let out a sharper, higher-pitched whine, and they subsided, though their eyes remained locked on Daniel, wary and suspicious. He took another step, then another, moving with excruciating slowness, keeping his body angled slightly away, avoiding direct eye contact now, trying to signal submission or at least non-aggression. And then the truly unbelievable part began. As Daniel started moving hesitantly along the game trail, the wolves didn't charge. They didn't melt back into the forest either. Instead, they began to move with him. The large female with the scar fell in line to his left, about 15 feet away, pacing him. Two others mirrored her movement on his right. The remaining two followed slightly behind, flanking him. They maintained a consistent distance, their bodies low, heads watchful, occasionally glancing back at the alpha who limped slowly behind them all. They weren't attacking. They weren't leaving. They were escorting him? No, Daniel corrected himself. Not escorting. Herding. They were containing him, directing him, ensuring he stayed on the path indicated by the alpha, effectively driving him out of their immediate territory. It was terrifying, surreal, and the only chance he had. He had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back now. He was committed to this silent, tense procession deeper into the Montana wild, surrounded by the very creatures he had, moments ago, been certain would kill him. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the bizarre procession moved down the game trail. The only sounds were the crunch of Daniel's boots on the dry earth and pine needles, the almost silent padding of wolf paws, the occasional rustle of underbrush, and Daniel's own ragged breathing loud in his ears. The 15-foot buffer the wolves maintained felt both immense and terrifyingly small. He could smell their wild scent. see the individual hairs bristling on their necks, catch the glint of their eyes as they constantly scanned him and their surroundings. Daniel walked with a rigid control he didn't feel, focusing on placing one foot carefully in front of the other on the narrow, winding trail. He kept his gaze mostly downward, tracking the path, occasionally flicking his eyes toward the wolves flanking him, assessing their posture, their alertness. Any sudden movement, any stumble, he knew, could shatter this fragile, inexplicable truce. The hickory stick felt simultaneously heavy and useless in his hand. He didn't dare raise it. He just let it swing naturally, hoping it looked like an aid for walking, not a weapon. His mind, however, was a whirlwind. He tried to piece together wolf behavior patterns he'd read about or observed over the years. Alpha dominance was absolute. The injured male's signal had clearly been understood, but was it a permanent directive or a temporary stay? Were they merely channeling him away from a den site nearby, or perhaps a recent kill they were protecting? Or was this something else, something that defied easy explanation within the known parameters of wolf ethology? He couldn't shake the feeling of being intensely scrutinized, judged by instincts far older and sharper than his own. The trail descended gradually, leading them out of the densest pine stands into slightly more open forest, patches of aspen shimmering yellow in the afternoon light. Sunlight occasionally broke through the canopy, dappling the forest floor. With the increased visibility came a new kind of tension. Could they perceive him as more of a threat in the open? Would the dynamic shift? He risked a quick glance back. The injured alpha was still following, lagging considerably now, his limp more pronounced, but his eyes were fixed on the group, a steady, unwavering